Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and these are the top headlines of the hour. Russia says it is resuming participation in the all-important Ukraine grain deal just days after it suspended its involvement over alleged drone strikes by Ukraine in Russia against Russian naval vessels in the Black Sea. Google Hangouts is shut down months after the tech giant warned users to switch to Google Chat. And India survive a real scare at the T20 World Cup to beat Bangladesh by 5 runs in a rain-affected match at the Adelaide Oval. The victory means India close in on a spot in the semi-finals.
Taking some very good catches, inflicting an excellent run-out. And a performance that... Zasdeep Singh finishes things off. Just a single.
We begin today with the news that Russia says it's resuming its participation in the Ukraine grain deal that has allowed vital food shipments to depart the country over the last few weeks. The Kremlin backed down just days after pulling out of the agreement, citing a Ukrainian attack on Russia's naval base in the Crimea. Moscow says it has now received sufficient guarantees from Kyiv on the demilitarization of a maritime corridor.
Thanks to the participation of the United Nations and Turkey's assistance, we were able to get the necessary written guarantees from the Ukrainian side about not using the humanitarian shipping corridor and Ukrainian ports designated for the export of agricultural products for military actions against the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the corridor for exporting grain requires reliable and long-term defense. As Russian forces continue to strike Ukrainian cities and target the country's energy facilities, authorities in the Ukrainian capital are now preparing more than 1,000 heating points for members of the public across the city. Ukrainian officials say Russian attacks have damaged 40% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Kyiv officials are planning to equip the heating points with generators and necessities, including water. Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenskaya, urged tech workers from around the world to help save people in Ukraine.
You have the power to determine the direction in which this world moves. After all, the dystopias we read about in science fiction novels and the threats of the destruction, of life destruction, are much closer than you think. We felt it in Ukraine because of Russian terror. Because Russia puts technology at the service of terror.
For more on this, I'm joined by Yusuf Erim, senior analyst with Turkey's international news channel, TRT World. He joins us live from Istanbul, in Turkey, I should say. And Yusuf, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for being with us today. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said earlier in the week that he was going to work to try and bring this grain deal back into force. I presume this news means that he's succeeded.
Well, it looks like the grain deal is back on track. The Turkish president announced just a little while ago that the grain deal resumed around 9 GMT as of today. So the deal is back on. But what we're hearing from the Russian side is that this resumption of operations in the Black Sea as part of the grain initiative does not necessarily mean an extension. Now, the deadline to renew the grain deal is midnight, November 18th. So once again, in 2 weeks, this deal is going to have to be renewed. The Russians still have some concerns that need to be ironed out in negotiations with the United Nations and with Turkey as well. But it seems that the temporary halt, that suspension of participation for now, has been lifted.
What do we know about the details of the demilitarized corridor that the Russians said they'd received assurances about during the course of these conversations?
Well, what we're seeing right now is it's under investigation, the attack on Sevastopol. The Russians are saying that the grain corridor was used for the alleged attack against their naval assets in that area. But again, the Ukrainian side denying it, the United Nations saying the grain corridor wasn't used for a military strike as well. So it's basically at this point finger pointing and a he said, she said, until we have a thorough independent investigation of what happened there. But it looks like going forward, the Russians are going to want to see more security guarantees, most likely by either Turkey or the United Nations, to be able to assure them and ease their security concerns regarding what's going on in that area known as the grain corridor in the Black Sea, that it's not being used for any type of military operations.
And Yusuf, with the clock now ticking as far as the extension of the existing agreement is concerned, is Turkey going to be the interlocutor that brokers those conversations? Does President Erdogan intend to remain fully engaged in this?
Yes, from what we understand, looking at the rhetoric coming from Ankara, the Turkish president, along with the UN Secretary General, they're going to continue their cooperation on mediating an extension of this deal. We've seen comments coming from both the United Nations and from Turkey that they are engaged in diplomacy, trying to extend this deal. I was in Brussels at a conference just earlier this week, and I heard the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Infrastructure speaking there, and he was saying that he wants to see the deal extended, not for 4-month increments, but now for a 1-year increment. The Russians obviously have their concerns. They want to see their concerns addressed in a new extension as well. So there's still a lot of diplomacy. Turkey is still part of this process. The Turkish president spoke with Vladimir Putin yesterday. He's expected to speak with the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, in the coming days. So that could either be later on today, quite possibly tomorrow, the day after, but a conversation with the Ukrainian president on the agenda and going to happen quite soon. That's the expectation.
Well, we'll keep tabs on it, Yusuf. I know you will be as well. I hope you'll come back and give us an update in a few days' time. That's Yusuf Erim, senior analyst with Turkey's international news channel, TRT World, joining us live today from Istanbul. Now, here in the United States, the man accused of attacking U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband has entered a not guilty plea in a San Francisco court. David DePape faces charges of attempted murder, attempted kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon. He's accused of attacking Paul Pelosi after breaking into the couple's home in the small hours of last Friday. Documents presented in court say DePape planned to hold the House Speaker herself hostage and, quote, break her kneecaps if she lied to him. In fact, Nancy Pelosi was 2,500 miles away here in Washington, D.C. when the attack took place. Her 82-year-old husband was seriously injured after being struck in the head with a hammer. He remains in hospital. The Speaker says her husband is making steady progress on what will be a long recovery. Meanwhile, the defendant's lawyer said the alleged attacker had dislocated his shoulder during the attack and has been moved to hospital from prison. David DePape was ordered held without bail during his arraignment.
What I will say is that there's also been a lot of speculation regarding Mr. DePape's vulnerability to misinformation, and that's certainly something that we're going to look into, that we're going to delve into as his defense team.
Prosecutors say DePape may have been on a suicide mission, but they say he also had plans to target other political figures.
The best that I can do as the district attorney of San Francisco is to hold this man accountable for the crime that he committed, but also make sure that I express my views on the issue, which is that I think we are at a point in the United States where political rhetoric has become too inflammatory. We have become a society that thinks it's acceptable to incite violent acts against our political leaders, and we can't be that type of America.
And so live to WION's US correspondent Susan Tehrani, who joins us today from New York. Susan, let's get caught up with the latest on the investigation into the attack on Paul Pelosi and the revelation contained in today's edition of the Washington Post that Capitol Police could actually have seen the break-in at the Pelosi residence if only they'd been looking at the right security monitor. Give us an update on that.
Absolutely. Revelations in the Washington Post and backed up by officials that are privy to the matter, that not only they weren't looking at the proper security cameras, but the Capitol Police have more to answer for. First of all, this deranged lunatic should have never been even close to Nancy Pelosi's house. The questions that also arise is whether or not the cameras that were operating, the Capitol Police cameras that were operating in Nancy Pelosi's home, were they malfunctioning? Were they operating correctly? And is it only the fact that people, the Capitol Police weren't just looking at the right cameras? Because now we're getting news that the first time that they realized that there was an intruder was from outside of Nancy Pelosi's home. Now, the Capitol Police says that Nancy Pelosi was in Washington. However, looking back, the Pelosi home, either these cameras on the part of the Capitol Police had to be requested to be deactivated, or they were malfunctioning, because they have to be activated 24/7, considering the fact that she's second in line of succession, and people could potentially, put a bomb, whether she's there or not. There are a lot of security issues. And then the second issue is, why was it that no one from the Capitol Police San Francisco chapter, why were they not on the ground at Nancy Pelosi's home? Again, she's the Speaker of the House. She's not just a regular member of Congress. So yes, a lot of questions right now geared towards the Capitol Police, beyond the fact of why they weren't looking at the right cameras.
But Susan, to be fair to the Capitol Police, there are 535 members of Congress. They've got hundreds of different incoming video feeds that they're monitoring all the time. Nancy Pelosi was not at her residence at the time of the attack. The Capitol Police are a small force. They can't possibly be looking at all of these cameras all the time, right?
Right, and I think the question right now is not to really attack the Capitol Police, but I think the question that many are asking is, considering the fact that Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House, second in line of succession, not that other members of Congress are not important, and the Capitol Police has said that, they are going to basically add more security, not only for Nancy Pelosi, but also other members of Congress. And then the question there arises, to what extent, how much manpower do they have? How much money can they really pour into this? But I think these are questions that ultimately, not to attack the Capitol Police, but need to be answered further into this investigation on if there was a malfunction in these cameras. Were they requested to be turned off? And whether or not there was, a lack of oversight on the part of the people that were operating these cameras. So the investigation is definitely ongoing. And I think that, as we move forward, more questions are going to arise. And the conversation is really going to move forward as there's this change in the landscape of communication with the internet, with trolling, with the heated political climate. How much is too much, or how much ultimately is enough to keep lawmakers, politicians, and others safe from deranged individuals like this one?
Well, certainly calls for more resources for the Capitol Police to do precisely that. That's WION's US correspondent Susan Tehrani reporting for us today live from the streets of New York. Thanks to her. Meanwhile, campaigning in America's midterm elections has entered its final turn. Election Day is next Tuesday, but already more than 22 million people have participated in early voting. On the ballot, the entire House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate, along with the keys to 36 gubernatorial mansions from coast to coast. The election is a referendum on Joe Biden's presidency so far, but it's also a referendum on Donald Trump's continuing hold over the Republican Party. Trump-backed election deniers are running for office in several states. At least 3 Republican candidates attended the January 6th Capitol riots last year. And one survey suggests that 60% of American voters will, on their ballot papers, find at least one Republican running for office who denies the legitimacy of Joe Biden's election win. As inflation remains high in the US, President Biden today will attempt to remind voters of the relative strength of the US economy on the world stage. But with his approval rating at only 42%, and many voters saying concerns about the economy are their number one issue, Democrats are worried about what the next week may hold in store. One element of every modern US election campaign is the presence of hecklers on the campaign trail. But this year, they've been more prevalent than usual.
And I look forward to campaigning with Rick Lazio.
You see them and hear their calls.
Great thing about America is a man gets to express his opinion.
Hecklers. And with another political campaign season in full swing, hecklers are being spotted all over the place. Former U.S. President Barack Obama, who was no stranger to heckling during his time in office, was recently interrupted multiple times while campaigning for Democrats in Florida. He responded with sarcasm.
Why is it that the folks that won the last election are so mad all the time? This is what I'm saying.
The balance of power is hardly in the heckler's favor. The politician on stage has the microphone and usually a robust security detail. Although in 2015, former U.S. President Donald Trump wasn't very happy with how security was handled at one of his rallies. Regardless, it's hardly a fair fight. The heckler has to scream from the top of their lungs just to be heard and is often outnumbered. But occasionally, a good heckle sparks a meaningful debate. Republican presidential hopeful Mitt Romney irritated by a handful of hecklers, insisted corporations are people, a comment which would become a defining moment in his campaign.
The change in the communication landscape has not only increased the expectation of a response, but often a two-way exchange. A savvy heckler comeback can win over a crowd, while an unscripted outburst may end up negatively affecting the candidate or politician on stage, depending on the circumstances. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
As relations between the US and China worsen over the issue of Taiwan, one commissioner at America's FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is suggesting that the United States should resume efforts to ban TikTok. Brendan Carr, appointed to the FCC by former President Donald Trump, made the suggestion in an interview here, echoing plans that the last administration was contemplating but never actually implemented. There are around 200 million users of TikTok in the United States, and many younger Americans now use the platform to get their news content every day. TikTok is currently in negotiations with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which reviews the national security implications of foreign investments in the country. It's determining whether TikTok's American operations can be divested by Chinese parent company ByteDance and then remain operational in the US. Meanwhile, Commissioner Carr is visiting Taiwan this week. His office says he'll discuss telecommunications and cybersecurity there over the next 48 hours. News from Google today. The Google Hangouts web app is no longer available after being finally shut down. Google Hangouts stopped working on Android and iOS in July of this year. Now the platform's remaining users must switch instead to Google Chat. While most messages and contacts will be automatically transferred, some data won't automatically migrate. Google says that users who want to keep their Hangouts data should use Google Takeout and download that data before New Year's Day. After that, it will be too late because the data will be deleted. Match Group, owners of the Tinder app, has beaten estimates for third quarter revenue. The company's revenues rose 1% to $810 million, higher than analysts' expectations of around $790 million. That increased revenue comes despite inflation and the toll it's taking on customers. Match Group owns a suite of dating apps, including Hinge and OkCupid, and has been rocked this year by executive changes and a challenging environment generally for tech giants. Analysts are concerned about the poor execution of new features on its flagship app Tinder. Shares of the company have fallen more than 65% this year, but the latest results stand out in what has been a quarter of poor performance for some of the biggest tech companies in America. Finally, if you've been waiting for the sequel to Avatar, you can finally exhale. A new full-length trailer of Avatar, The Way of Water, is finally out.
think I'm crazy. Behind those big rocks. But I feel her.
hear her heartbeat. She's so close.
So what does her heartbeat sound like?
Mighty.
We cannot let you bring your war here.
Outcast. That's all they see.
I see.
The way of water connects all things. Before your birth and after your death.
This is our home!
I need you with me. And I need you to be strong.
Get the popcorn. Get the popcorn ready. That is all for this edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks. I'll be back again soon. And don't forget to stay tuned for all of your news updates right here to WION World is One.
There are many other...